Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for an opportunity to speak in this debate. And although I am the originator of the original complaint to standards back in September 2016, I do rise more in sorrow than anger to comment on these matters. And I would also like to thank the Commissioner for Standards, Catherine Stone, for her diligent work on these matters on our behalf, protecting the reputation of this House, also her predecessor, Catherine Hudson, and indeed all the elected and lay members of the Standards Committee. So after 37 months, we have the report. It's 69 pages, and it's indeed grim reading for any honourable colleagues who have taken the time to wade through it. The recommendations of the Standards Committee are the longest suspension handed out since records began, a 6-month suspension which would, in normal times, trigger a recall, and also the fact that they've said that the member for Leicester East should not be offered a former member's pass when his time ceases in this House. But I think what is clear as to why this investigation has taken so long, and I think it's been quite damning on the character for the member for Leicester East, is the delays, the deflection and the confusion that he appears to have, the committee believe that he is conducted to drag out these proceedings to a position where if the member for Leicester East does not stand at the next election, that none of the punishments will be meted out to him. He will have avoided a suspension if the House decides to accept the recommendations. They will be only for a few days, not the 6 months. And therefore there will be no recall, and effectively the only censure he will face is not having the privilege of a former member's pass when he ceases to be here. I'm very aware that the member concerned, the member for Leicester East, is not present. And the chair of the Standards Committee has hinted at a statement that he has put out immediately after the publication of this report on his website. And in fairness to the member for Leicester East and for the information of this House, I would like to read that statement out to the House, Mr. Speaker. So this is posted out on the 28th of October, shortly after the release of the Standards Committee report into his conduct, on his website currently. The events of the 27th of August 2016 were purely personal and private and occurred in circumstances where neither Mr Vaz's public nor his parliamentary role were engaged. Mr Vaz has never bought, possessed, dealt or used illegal drugs. He has a cardiovascular condition which would mean that were he to consume any non-prescribed drugs, he would in all likelihood die. The Commissioner has confirmed that Mr Vaz has not committed any criminal acts. The referrals made, including by Andrew Bridgen MP, were a waste of police resources. The transcript of the recordings which the Committee and Commissioner rely on has been completely discredited by a highly qualified forensic scientist who has cast considerable doubt on its reliability. She stated, and I quote, "Overall, the transcripts applied to me fell significantly short of what is expected in terms of a transcript intended for use in legal, disciplinary or similar proceedings, and it cannot be considered a reliable evidential record of the speech content of the questioned recordings." It goes on. Mr Vaz has cooperated at all stages of this process. At no stage during the inquiry either Commissioner stated in writing or otherwise that Mr Vaz has been uncooperative. Commissioner Hudson stated in terms that Mr Vaz has been helpful. Mr Vaz vigorously rejects the allegation that he failed to cooperate with the inquiry. To the contrary, he holds the standards system in the highest regard and with the highest respect. It then goes on to give some links to reports from the inquiry available on the parliamentary website and indicates where people reading the statement should look in the report for various statements that the Honourable Member for Leicester East regards as evidential to support his statement, and it completes with Keith Vaz has been treated for a serious mental health condition for the last 3 years as a result of the events of the 27th of August 2016. He has shared his medical reports in confidence with the committee. He has today been admitted to hospital and his office will not be making any further comments. I think, having read the report, that there is no apology from the member for Leicester East. No hint of apology. No hint of regret. A complete denial of the unanimous conclusions of the Standards Committee. And that may hint at his mental state of mind. He is in complete denial to what the level of dissatisfaction the public have with the behaviour of some of the members of this House, and he has certainly detracted from our reputation. Mr. Speaker, there have been many tributes to you today, and I would wish to add my own, in that if you'd acted on the letter I wrote to you in September 2015, a year before the incident of the then Chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, where I raised my concerns with you that the actions of and activities of the then Chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, if they came to light, would risk seriously damaging...
One will resume his seat. This matter was raised on a previous occasion, and I am going to say in all solemnity and with firmness to the honourable gentleman and to the House what the position is. I could not have known that the honourable gentleman intended to use this debate in the way that he has thus far done, in an orderly fashion, but in a way that I could not have predicted. I certainly couldn't have anticipated, and the honourable gentleman didn't do me the courtesy of telling me that he intended to address my reaction to these matters. But I will say to the House that I do recall, I don't have the detail in front of me, I do recall the honourable gentleman writing to me, highlighting his concerns about the right honourable gentleman, the member for Leicester East, and imploring me to act. And I indicated to the honourable gentleman, in terms, both on the basis of my own knowledge, I say to the House, of the role and responsibility of the chair, and on the strength of the professional advice of the clerk of the House, that it was not, repeat, not for me to intervene in any way, shape or form. The premise upon which the request by the honourable gentleman for me to intervene was based was entirely, and I emphasise entirely, misplaced. It is not for the Speaker to get involved in the study of or investigation into complaints that are made about individual members of Parliament. It is not for the Speaker to perform a second job as a kind of nighttime Columbo, looking into matters that one member wants to raise about another. That is not only not necessary, it is not appropriate. It is totally out with, I say with complete clarity and for the avoidance of doubt, it is totally out with the role of the Speaker. If after 9.5 years in this place, notwithstanding my best efforts to help the honourable gentleman to do better, he still labours not merely under the misapprehension, but under the ignorant delusion that it is somehow the responsibility of the chair to intervene, frankly, I have to say to colleagues, I can't help him. I can't help him. I've tried to help the honourable gentleman. I've tried on many occasions to educate the honourable gentleman. But if the honourable gentleman won't be helped or educated, I can't do anything about that. But what I can do something about, and I have sought to do so for 10 years, is securing compliance with the procedures of this House. It is absolutely legitimate for the honourable gentleman to speak in this debate if he thinks it's proper to do so, and if the honourable gentleman feels that the general approach that he's adopted to these sorts of matters, i.e. allegations of misconduct against other members, enhances his standing in the House, it is entirely for him to make that judgment. If he thinks it makes him a more popular or a respected member to spend quite a lot of time writing to the Standards Commissioner, complaining about this one or that one or the other one, if that's the approach to parliamentary service, or part of the approach to parliamentary service for which the honourable gentleman opts, that is his privilege. And if he wishes to speak in this debate, including when I have resumed my seat, he is welcome to do so. I think he might usefully make a judgment about whether the House wants to hear him at great length when there is a clear judgment by the committee which has been accepted, which has been endorsed by the opposition chief whip. If he still feels he wants to speak at some considerable length and it makes him feel better and he thinks what an excellent contribution he's made, that's his prerogative. What the honourable gentleman won't do is breach the rules of this House and tell me, I say, not least to members of the public, what the job of the chair is. I know what the job of the chair is, and I've done it to the best of my ability. And to err is human, so I make my mistakes, but I've done it to the best of my ability for over a decade. And I don't simply assert or suggest. I state with complete confidence that it is not part of my job to make representations to a member that because of this rumour or that rumour, or this allegation or that allegation, or this person disliking him or that person disliking him, therefore it would be best if he stood down from the chairmanship of his select committee. That is not the responsibility of the Speaker of the House of Commons. And if the honourable gentleman still thinks otherwise, I fear he's beyond redemption in the matter. I mean, I'd like to help him, but he just doesn't want to be helped. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Speaker, I thank you for your advice. As always, for the last 10 years, you have advised me on many occasions. But had you waited for my conclusion, you would have seen that I was going to extol your decision not to get involved in this matter. Because had you done so, we may well have protected the reputation of this House, but I doubt we ever would have got to see the full report that is now before us, Mr. Speaker. And the answer is that despite this report having been public knowledge, been read by members for several days, the member for Leicester East remains a member of the Labour Party. He has the Labour whip. He currently still is a serving member of the Labour National Executive Committee, and he is still currently the candidate for Leicester East at the forthcoming election. That, of course, Mr. Speaker, is a matter for the Labour Party, and also a matter, I believe, for the public who we all serve in our own constituencies, not less Leicester East, which I believe, and I think many other people do, that Leicester East deserves rather better, Mr. Speaker. We all recall that we think about what we've done in the past and the way we've voted, and we'll all be held to account for that very shortly on the 12th of December. That only a month after the member for Leicester East resigned following the rent boy and cocaine scandal from the chairmanship of the Home Affairs Select Committee, rather reluctantly, He was nominated by his party, the Labour Party, to go on to the Justice Committee. Only 4 weeks late after, he'd considered himself unsuitable to continue as chairing the Home Affairs Select Committee.
Order, I'm sorry, but I must invite the honourable gentleman to resume his seat, and I'll tell him why. The honourable gentleman tries to demonstrate how fair he's being by saying that belatedly he agrees with me, and which he's never previously given any indication of at all. If that's what he now says, well, then I'm glad that he's come to recognise the error of his past ways and the extreme folly, as well as the sheer nastiness of making repeated representations to the chair to intercede in a matter in which the chair, of course, should not intercede. But what the honourable gentleman is doing now is what he attempted to do on the occasion of that debate about the nomination of the right honourable gentleman for the Justice Select Committee. What the honourable gentleman is seeking to do is to drag into this debate, as he dragged into that debate, material that it was not appropriate to share with the House in the context of the debate. This is a short debate on a report, and the reason why the honourable gentleman's point is not relevant or appropriate is that, first of all, he's going back on matters to do with the Justice Select Committee, of which I think the report doesn't treat. The report does not get involved in that. That is an historic matter, and it's a matter of political opinion and parliamentary debate at the time, but it's not relevant to the Standards Committee's report. And secondly, the honourable gentleman, who is a party politician and a campaigning party politician, and I acknowledge that, the honourable gentleman, I'm afraid, just cannot resist getting into the subject of whether it is or isn't appropriate for a particular person to be a candidate in a given election, and the honourable gentleman's view, which he obviously thinks is enormously important and interesting, although it may not be enormously important or interesting to anyone else, as to whether the health of the people of Leicester East is best served by representation by its current right honourable member or by someone else. I have to say to the honourable gentleman, I'm not interested in that. And I don't frankly think the House is interested in that. If the honourable gentleman wants to say, look, I complained and I was right, and the report has criticised, censured and punished, or proposes to do so, the right honourable gentleman, he could have done that and sat down by now. But I give him a final warning, and it is a warning. I'm not going to have the House abused by the way in which the honourable gentleman chooses to behave. If he's got a sentence or two that he wants to utter as to why he thinks it's a decent report and he agrees with it, that's fine. If he wants to launch a further ad hominem attack on the right honourable gentleman member of Leicester East, this is not the time or place to do so. And I do, in all sincerity and kindness, say to the honourable gentleman, show some antennae, man, for the will of the House, and show some sensitivity. You've made your point in making a complaint, which the honourable gentleman had every right to do, and the committee has determined the matter. It would be, I think, seemly if the honourable gentleman speedily brought his speech to a conclusion. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you once again for more help and advice, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable gentleman will resume his seat. It's not help and advice. I'm telling the honourable gentleman what the position is. Don't mix it with the chair. If you've got a couple more sentences to utter, you will do so. If you want to dilate at length, you will not. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Mr. Speaker, I will bring my remarks to a conclusion, but it is clear to me, and it will be clear to the public, that to the fag end of your tenure in that chair, you are defending the indefensible and your very close relationship with the honourable member in question. The House can come to its own conclusions. The Standards Committee has come to its own conclusions, and Mr. Speaker, the public will come to theirs. Thank you very much.
I'm quite sure the public will come to its own conclusion. Let me say to the honourable gentleman, he can try to smear me. He will get the square root of nowhere. I am friendly with the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Leicester East, as I'm friendly with the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Christchurch, and the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Aylesbury, and the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Stroud, and the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Strangford. I'm friendly with a great many members, having served in this place for 22 years. I do not get involved in matters appertaining to standards. There is a machinery for deliberation on those matters in the form of a Parliamentary Standards Commissioner and a committee. They deal with those matters. And the Honourable Gentleman only a few moments ago was saying, in what he thought was a frightfully clever twist, that he'd come to accept that I was right to say that I couldn't get involved. And if the Honourable Gentleman is now saying that in fact my close relationship shows that I'm trying to defend the Honourable Gentleman, he is contradicting himself, not within days or weeks or months, he's contradicting himself within minutes. I'm not trying to defend the conduct of the Right Honourable Member. What I'm doing on behalf and in support of the House is defending, colleagues, members of the public, the integrity of an independent process. If the Honourable Gentleman can't or won't grasp that fact, with the very greatest of respect to him, or such respect as I can muster, that says more about him than it does about me. Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, and I hope the whole House will wish that the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East recovers and his health is restored. I strongly support the motions here that the House approves the first report of the Committee on Standards, HC 93. We endorse the recommendations in paragraphs 99 and 101, and the suspension from the service of the House for a period of 9 months. I served with others on the Standards Committee in the early 2000s, when Elizabeth Filkin was the Standards Director. She was badly treated by the House, and even treated worse by the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East. And if I can just read part of paragraph 97 of the report, Mr. Vaz has previously been found to be in serious breach of the code and in contempt of the House. In 2002, the Standards and Privileges Committee found he had recklessly made a damaging and untrue allegation against another person, which could have intimidated them, and had wrongly interfered in the House's investigative process. In particular, that, quote, having set the Commission on a false line of inquiry, Mr. Vaz then accused her of interfering in a criminal investigation and threatened to report it to the Speaker, end of quote. And he goes on to other points that he'd made. My honourable friend for Leicester North West has rightly read out some of the words on the Right Honourable Member's website, which are totally contradicted by the report I have in my hand. I think someone who's willing to do that after the report comes out should have the suspension doubled to a year. And I say this, not a party point, he should not be nominated. If nominated, he should not be elected. And if elected, he should be suspended for a very long time.
Thank the Honourable Gentleman for his contribution. Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, I hadn't intended to participate in this debate, but as a member of the current committee, and as my honourable friend from Worthing will recognise, it's one of the less pleasant responsibilities that falls to people in this House to actually serve on the Standards Committee, but that's the position I've been in for quite a long time. And I can recall a time when we passed sentence, in a sense, on my right honourable friend, the member for Basingstoke. And she came, we said that she should make an apology to the House. And I was in the House when she made her apology. And I recall the sense of outrage that there was that her apology was not as fulsome as some people might have wished. And she, as a result, suffered, I think, additional penalties within her own constituency. A long time ago now, and I'm sure all has been forgiven. But in that context, when I listened to my honourable friend, the member for North West Leicestershire, reading out what is on the website from the Right Honourable Gentleman for Leicester East, it fills me with horror, because it really is totally contradictory to the findings of the committee, and it doesn't come across in a report like this the extent to which the detail has been gone into by the members of the committee, including lay members who do it for love, really, and also the Commissioner and her predecessor. An enormous amount of work has gone into this, and that we reached a conclusion. We are satisfied from the evidence we have considered that Mr. Vaz did, on the 27th of August 2016, offer to procure and pay for illegal drugs for use by a third party. And paragraph 54, on the basis of the evidence supplied by the audio recording and the transcript, we reached the following conclusions germane to the Commissioner's findings. That the Right Honourable Member's explanation of the incident on the 27th of August 2016 is not believable, that on this occasion Mr. Vaz expressed a willingness to procure a Class A drug, cocaine, for use of another person, that on this occasion Mr. Vaz engaged in paid-for sex. We consider that the evidence supporting these conclusions is compelling. In the light of that, I follow very much my honourable friend, the member for Worthing, saying, would it be reasonable if the Right Honourable Gentleman is returned following the next general election for the Standards Committee to revisit this issue, having regard to what's on the website now, which can only be regarded as an attempt to bring the work of the Standards Committee, which I commend, and particularly the work of the Honourable Lady as the chair of that committee, but it seems to me that what's on the website is designed to bring the work of the Standards Committee into disrepute.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman who's expressed himself with his customary courtesy. I think that the answer to that question, but I'm looking plaintively in the direction of the chair of the Standards Committee, is that that is a matter for the committee, and it would be quite wrong for me to seek to influence it in any way, and I do not do so. Absolutely not a matter for me, or indeed for any occupant of the chair. It is, I think, a matter for the committee. The committee, I'm saying this by way of explanation and attempted intelligibility to observers, the committee has authority in this matter and, if you will, ownership of it. Committees are in charge of their own inquiries. And, you know, it would be a matter for the committee, but obviously not in this Parliament. And, you know, I think that that's the best way to leave it. And obviously, although I heard the recital, and I don't use the term recital in any disobliging sense, I heard the recital by the member from North West Leicestershire of what was on the website. It's not something that I had studied, and I hope people will understand that it's not something that the Speaker would have studied. There's absolutely no reason to expect that I would have done so. But it is a matter of the committee. I think it's also fair to say that the committee has a range of sanctions available to it, and it makes the judgment as to which sanction or set of sanctions it wishes to recommend to the House. If, for whatever reason, the committee doesn't recommend an apology is not required. If, on the other hand, it does, it might be. A very different matter was recently brought to my attention in relation to a non-member of the House and the allocation of a pass. And I had to point out that there was not an unpurged contempt, that a person had behaved badly and been criticised, but he wasn't failing to apologise when he had been instructed to do so. For whatever reason, he had not been instructed to do so and was therefore not required to do so. And my understanding is that that is the case in this instance. Now, whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, that's a matter for the committee. Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, following that, we notice that the motion is in the name of the Leader of the House, so that were the person concerned to be re-elected, we wouldn't have to wait till the re-establishment of the Standards Committee. The Leader could re-present a motion in the same terms, and if subsequently the Standards Committee want to take further action, that would then follow.
Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman. Point of order, the Leader of the House.
Helpful, Mr. Speaker, to the House. The Select Committee has specifically asked that the next Leader of the House, or me if I continue in office in the new Parliament, would bring the suspension forward as soon as the House reassembles, so that it isn't in effect only a 2-day suspension, and that's been specifically requested by the committee.
Forgive me, I was myself perfectly clear on that point, although I'm grateful to the Leader of the House for making it clear to colleagues. I think it was always intended that if the House accepts the report, the suspension would take effect after the election. Whether the committee wishes to revisit the issue in the light of what the Honourable Gentleman for Christchurch and others have said, you know, is in a sense, if he'll forgive me saying so, a slightly different point. Kate Green.
My understanding is that We would like, in the event that the Right Honourable Member is returned, for the next Leader of the House to bring forward a motion to continue the suspension. But this Parliament and this Leader and no member of this Parliament can compel that. That will be a matter for the next Parliament. Insofar as the next committee is concerned, any member is at liberty to make a complaint about the conduct of a member at the time that he was serving as a member. We have recently brought in new provisions around historic cases, but the committee would be a new committee. It would not be able simply to pick up an old case that was being conducted by our current committee.
Thank you. That's by way of being a public information notice from the chair of the committee, which I hope is helpful to colleagues. Thank you. And I think I'm right in saying that colleagues who wish to speak in the debate have now done so. The question is the motion on standards as on the order paper. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.